Hello everyone, welcome back to ByteWise Academy, where we make computer concepts simple and easy to understand. In our previous videos, we learned about storage devices such as hard disk drives, state drives, pen drives, and optical disks. Today, we are going to learn a very important topic in computer fundamentals, that is computer memory. By the end of this lesson, you will understand what computer memory is, why a computer needs memory, the different types of memory, RAM, ROM, cache memory, and the difference between memory and storage. So let's begin. Before we start today's topic, let's quickly revise what we learned in the previous lesson. Storage devices are used to store data permanently. For example, when you save a document, a photo or a video, it is stored in a hard disk, SSD or pen drive. But here is a question. If the files are stored permanently in a hard disk, how does the CPU access and process them while you are working? The answer is computer memory. Memory acts as the CPU's workspace. Now let us see what is computer memory. Computer memory is the electronic storage area where data, instructions, and programs are stored so that the CPU can process them. Let me repeat this. Computer memory is the electronic storage area where data, instructions, and programs are stored so that the CPU can process them. Think of memory as a study table. Your books are kept in a cupboard, but when you are studying, you place them on your table. Similarly, files are stored in storage devices, but while you are working, they are loaded into memory. Without memory, the CPU cannot process any information efficiently. You can relate or you can compare the memory to your study table. Assume it as a study table. Think memory as a study table. Your books are kept in a cupboard. In your table or under your table, you will have a cupboard in which you always keep books, right? But when you are studying, you place them on your table. Exactly the same way, files are stored in storage devices, but while you are working, they are loaded into memory. Now let us see why is memory important. Imagine opening Microsoft Word. When you click the Word icon, it doesn't run directly from the hard disk. Instead, it is first loaded into RAM. The CPU then accesses it from RAM because RAM is much faster than a storage device. Memory allows us to run applications, open files, edit documents, watch videos, play games, perform multiple tasks at the same time. Without memory, computers would become extremely slow. Now let us see what are the types of computer memory. Computer memory is divided into two main categories. The first is primary memory. The second is secondary memory. Computer's memory is primarily categorized into two. They are primary memory and secondary memory. Primary memory includes RAM, ROM, and cache memory, which we will see in detail. And the secondary memory includes hard disk drives, HDDs, SSDs, pen drives, DVDs, etc. that we have already seen in the previous lesson. Today's lesson mainly focuses on primary memory. Today we are going to discuss primary memory in detail. Now come, let's see primary memory. Primary memory is the memory directly accessed by the CPU. It is much faster than secondary memory. Although it is very fast, it has a smaller storage capacity. The the CPU constantly uses primary memory while the computer is running. The CPU constantly uses primary memory while the computer is running. That's why it is also called the main memory. So now let us see, we have seen RAM, ROM and cache memory comes under primary memory. So now let us see them one by one. RAM. RAM stands for random access memory. Random access memory temporarily stores the data and programs currently being used. RAM is meant to store the data and programs currently being used. The app which we are using, the data or the programs related to that particular app are temporarily stored in the RAM, random access memory. For example, if you are browsing the internet, watching YouTube and preparing a PowerPoint at the same time, all these programs are loaded into RAM. Okay, while you are browsing the internet and you are watching YouTube, or you are using a PowerPoint or a Word or any other application, all these programs are loaded into the RAM. RAM allows the CPU to access them quickly. So now let us see what are the features of RAM. RAM has several important characteristics. First, it is volatile memory. This means all data stored in RAM is lost when the computer is switched off. Okay, remember this. RAM is volatile. Volatile means the data stored in this RAM is lost when the computer is switched off. That means when it is turned off, when the computer is turned off, all the programs or the data that is loaded onto the RAM while the computer was running will be erased. Second, RAM supports both reading and writing. We can do both activities. Reading, we can read files from RAM and we can write onto the RAM as well. Third, it is much faster than a hard disk. It is faster than the hard disk. The more RAM a computer has, the better it can handle multitasking. Multitasking in the sense at the same time we open multiple apps, and if the RAM capacity is more in a computer, then it can handle multitasking more efficiently. That's why computers with 8 GB or 16 GB RAM usually perform better than those with only 2 GB RAM. So the RAM capacity is more important for a computer to handle multitasking efficiently. So now let us see the types of RAM. RAM is mainly of two types. The first is SRAM, which stands for static random access memory. It is very fast but expensive and is mainly used in cache memory. The second one is DRAM or dynamic random access memory. It is slower than SRAM but much cheaper. Most computers uses DRAM as their main system memory. Now let's go to ROM. ROM stands for read-only memory. Unlike RAM, ROM stores permanent instructions. This is the second type of primary memory categorization, and which is ROM. Unlike RAM, ROM stores permanent instructions. These instructions help the computer start when we press the power button. These instructions are permanent. ROM contains firmware such as BIOS or UEFI. Even when the computer is switched off, ROM keeps its data. Even when the computer is switched off, ROM keeps its data, unlike RAM. The content in the RAM or the data in the RAM is erased once the computer is turned off. But unlike RAM, ROM contains that data in itself even when the computer is turned off. Now let us see types of ROM. ROM also has different types. PROM can be programmed only once. Okay, EPRAM can be ROM can be erased using ultraviolet light and programmed again. EEPROM can be erased and rewritten electrically. I will give you the expansions for these acronyms in the description. You can check out it. Okay. Modern computers mostly use EEPROM because it is more flexible and convenient. Now let us compare RAM versus ROM. Let's compare RAM versus ROM now. RAM is temporary while ROM is permanent. RAM is volatile whereas ROM is non-volatile. RAM allows both reading and writing. ROM mainly stores firmware and it cannot be written or it cannot be updated. A simple way to remember this is RAM running programs, ROM remembers startup instructions. RAM is running program, the present running program, and its concerned data and programs are all loaded onto the RAM, and ROM remembers startup instructions. When we switch on the or turn on the computer, the ROM is activated. And now let us see the third category, cache memory. Cache memory is the smallest but fastest memory in a computer. It is located very close to the CPU. Cache stores frequently used instructions so the CPU doesn't have to fetch them repeatedly from ROM. Cache is mainly meant to store frequently used instructions so the CPU doesn't have to fetch them repeatedly from the RAM. Again and again, CPU doesn't have to fetch the same instructions from the RAM. So such frequent instructions are stored onto the cache memory, and this cache memory is very close to the CPU. This significantly improves the speed of the computer because it doesn't have to again and again communicate with the RAM. So cache obviously reduces the this again and again communicating with the RAM, so that the speed of the computer is improved. Cache memory is available in 3 levels, L1, L2 and L3. Amongst them, L1 is the fastest. I will give you the details of L1, L2, L3 also in the description. You can check it out. Next, memory hierarchy. Let's now understand the memory hierarchy. At the top are registers. Next comes the cache memory, then the RAM. Finally, secondary storage like SSDs and hard disks. As we move downwards, storage capacity increases. However, speed decreases. This is why registers are the fastest but smallest, while hard disks are the slowest but can store huge amounts of data. So the memory hierarchy is in such a way that registers are at the top. We'll see what registers are in the coming classes. So the registers are at the top and they are the fastest but can store very little amount of data. Next comes the cache memory and then the RAM. Finally, the secondary storage like SSDs and hard disks. ROM is the one which is startup memory. So we these are the memory things that we work with. That means we can do the right operation. So we are talking about these things other than ROM. So as we move downwards, storage capacity increases but the speed decreases. So that hard disks can store huge amounts of data, but it is slower when compared to registers and cache memory and all the other things. So now let us clearly understand what is memory and storage. What is the difference between these two? Students often confuse memory with storage. Memory is temporary and is used while the computer is working. Storage is permanent and is used to save files. Memory is faster. Storage has a much larger capacity. think of memory as your study table and storage as your bookshelf. You work on the table, but after finishing, you keep your books back on the shelf. So memory is temporary and is used while the computer is working. We work with memory while we are working with the computer, but storage is permanent and is used to save files. So in storage, we save the files, okay? And with the memory, we work with the computer. While we are working with the computer, the data is stored onto the memory for our access. So that is memory, and storage stores the files. Understand? So just like when you work on your table, you get the books which you require and use them and put them back to the shelf. Shelf is storage and your study table is memory. Let us understand this with a real life analogy. Let's make this even simpler. Imagine you are preparing for an exam. Your bookshelf stores all your textbooks. That represents secondary storage. Your study table is where you keep the books you are currently reading. That is nothing but RAM. You take a book for your preparation. You take a particular book for your preparation and you keep it on the table. So in real world, how the table is being used for you is exactly the same as the way RAM works for a computer. A sticky note with important formula kept right in front of you is like cache memory because it provides the quickest access. Okay, you are sitting on a table, but you kept the book on a table, which is just like the RAM, and a sticky note with important formulas kept right in front of you is like cache memory because it provides the quickest access, so that you do not have to go back to the same book in the shelf and get it back again and again. You just made a sticky note and sticked it to the wall on your near your table so that you can have quick access to those formulas. So that is called the cache memory. Exactly the way in which the sticky note works for you is the same. The cache memory works for a computer. This analogy helps us understand how different types of memory works together. Understand? So now you have memory, storage, and memory and storage. But memory and storage are different, but they both work together for human beings to make use of a computer in an efficient way. So I hope you have understood what memory is and what storage is, and what are the different types of memory that we have, and what are different types of storage that we have already seen in the previous lesson. So based on the understanding, let's quickly have a quiz. Now let us test our understanding. What does RAM stand for? Which memory is volatile? Which memory stores firmware? Which memory is faster, RAM or cache? How is memory different from storage? Pause the video and try to answer these questions before checking your notes. Okay, just send your answers in the comments. So the summary is, let's quickly summarize today's lesson. Today we have learned what computer memory is, why memory is needed, types of memory, RAM, ROM, cache memory, memory hierarchy, and the difference between memory and storage. I hope this lesson made the topic simple and easy to understand. If you found this video helpful, please like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to ByteWise Academy. For more easy to understand computer fundamental lessons, in our next video, we will learn about the central processing unit, or the CPU, which is known as the brain of the computer. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and I will see you in the next lesson. Thank you for watching.